How you doing, everybody? How you doing today? Hope you're doing awesome. Okay, what are we checking out? Depeche Mode and Enjoy the Silence from Parody to Royalty, New British Canon. Okay, so we're checking this out. Why? Because one of my awesome patrons by the name of Ali recommended I check it out. I've only ever heard of Depeche Mode once in my life, and that's when I was asked to do a reaction to it, and I did it, and the online YouTube community was blown away. They're like, how have you not even heard of this band? I'm like, I don't know. Apparently, they're a ginormous deal, and this will be a great way for me to learn more about this iconic band, which, you know, is going to be awesome. And so get your popcorn or your bag of Snickers and a piss jar, because we're here for at least 22 minutes. I'll be pausing throughout to give some feedback and that kind of thing, of course. And but let's get into it. Let's go.
It wasn't really a riot, let's get it straight. I mean, there were a lot of people. It's not what I call a riot. There wasn't any violence involved. A couple of people did get hurt, unfortunately, but basically all the fans that were there were very well behaved. It was, Chelsea on a Saturday afternoon. Now that's a riot.
Kids armed with synths and squeaky bubblegum tunes.
Okay.
In 1980, Depeche Mode arrived. By the end of the decade, they had 20 UK top 40 hits and had grown progressively darker, moodier, and more industrial. But still remain.
Okay, so they started off as very much like a more pop appeal, you know, or like techno appeal, like very much, and then they get darker and darker as they go on. What's that beginning thing about a riot? They must have people classified it as a riot, I guess, you know. But that's how it happens sometimes when you get popularity, you know.
Progressively darker, moodier, and more industrial, but still remaining pop. However, in the US, they were not mainstream. Known mostly by listeners of Anglophile college radio DJs, and seen alongside the Smiths, Cure, New Order, and XTC as alternative. Though this cult appeal made them one of the biggest US concert draws of the late 80s, they couldn't back that up in album sales. But
Really?
1990's Violator would change that, and alongside Personal Jesus, its second single would solidify that after a decade as a band, they could still have the biggest songs of their career, defining modern rock crossover hits in the process.
So it sounded like they were having a lot of success live on tour. They had like I would say a cult following, but like a fairly large cult following, because they said like people in the US didn't hear about it. And they also had struggled with their album sales. So that's a big thing, right? Like that's the weird thing about the music industry, hey? It's like, yeah, you could be doing great in concert, but it's just like, yeah, but how many albums did you sell? Because the moment you're like, hey, I went platinum or whatever, then suddenly everybody's like, oh, I got to get my hands on you. You know, I got to get you on their airway and a radio station, that kind of stuff. They base it off record sales. But I guess it's one metric to use, but that's interesting.
This is New British Canon, and this is the story of Enjoy the Silence.
Nice, let's go.
By 1989, Depeche Mode were looking to leave their past behind. When they emerged at the beginning of the 80s with their first UK hits.
Oh, that totally sounds like
They
80s.
had acquired an image. That of the inoffensive, chirpy synth poppers from Basildon, peers of Haircut and 100 and Kajagoogoo, and perfect for the front of teeny bopper magazines or interviews on Kids TV.
You must get asked this a million times. I always call you Depeche Mode. I still hear people calling you Depeche Mode.
Well, we sort of, you know, we don't really mind that much.
Depeche Mode, that's what I said. Right before this again, I looked up, I said, how do you pronounce it? And it said Depeche Mode. Like Pesci, like Joe Pesci. But they're saying it's different. How are they saying it?
Or interviews on Kids TV.
You must get asked this a million times. I always call you Depeche Mode. I still hear people calling you Depeche Mode.
Well, we sort of, you know, we don't really mind that much.
Depeche.
In all meanings of the word,
Try to remember
Depeche
that.
Mode
Depeche.
were a pop band. The serious UK music weeklies saw them as a joke. I think it's partly true that we've been misunderstood, but probably better to say we've been ignored. I think our merit and worth has been completely overlooked. To a certain extent, we've never been forgiven for our early selves, and the way we were when we were starting off. We were very sickly, ultra nice, and in some ways that was the charm. But it also got on people's nerves. And with their...
So they're like, yeah, you're too nice and too poppy on teen magazines and all that. You're like, it's just like, it becomes irritating. It's almost like back in the day, you know, when it was like not trying to compare them to like New Kids on the Block or like NSYNC and that kind of stuff, but like those kind of groups, they have huge fan bases, but at the same time, there's other people who are just like, ugh, cringe, you know. It's because this was like boy band, you know. So I guess they were going through the same struggles.
In ways, that was the charm, but it also got on people's nerves.
It got on people's nerves.
And
right?
with their core songwriter Vince Clarke leaving after their first album,
Ooh.
and Martin Gore taking his place for their shaky second, Depeche Mode were seeming like a very short-lived joke. But they kept getting hits. In spite of some awkward lyricism, 1983's
so
Everything
80s.
Counts, reaching number 6, showed that they could potentially outlive
Jitterbugging.
Take Up 100. To further separate themselves from the flash-in-the-pan synth-poppers, they took notes from industrial projects like Germany's Einstürzende Neubauten. And the UK's Test Department.
Okay, I'm hearing the sounds. That's
This not
something.
only inspired their evolving sound, with the group implementing loads of abrasive samples and mechanized percussion.
Okay, I see the influence there, yeah.
But also the band's evolving look, with
Like
chains.
it almost got like that kind of like construction feel, like dun-dun-dun, ching-ching. You hear like metal clanging and like different weird sounds like that, and you work it into the music while still having a beat in the background that people can vibe out to. It's pretty cool. Look at this group here now. You know what the main thing is they stuck with it here. It's like it's a struggle to get off the ground, I guess, but you know. And look at his outfit, leather collar with the 3 straps. This guy down here in the bottom right corner. You can tell me his name if you want. I don't know his name, unfortunately, yet. But this blonde guy is ready to party. Like these 3 back here, you know, this guy over here is all business casual. The redhead guy, he looks all serious. These 2 back here are just like, we got a leather on. You know, we're cool, we're fly. And then this guy over here, it's like, I'm ready to party and get it on.
and fetish gear entering their stage attire. Gore would take to occasionally wearing a leather skirt, which would provoke snide comments from the rock press for the rest of the decade. Looking back, I'm not very happy about some of the clothes I've worn. Every interview we do,
That's funny, they're talking about clothes. I literally started, that was what jumped out to me with that picture, was their clothes. And then sure enough, I unpause it and they're like, and so this is the impact their clothes had on their career. What's the chances?
Looking back, I'm not very happy about some of the clothes I've worn. Every interview we do, the skirt is mentioned. I actually think it's quite funny, though I didn't look at it deeply. I regret that so much attention was paid to it, and though their content was more perverse than before,
Okay, they got a lot of edgy lyrics. I get it.
Master and Servant, Shake the Disease, Blasphemous Rumours, and Stripped were all top 20 singles in the UK. 1986's Black Celebration would not only spawn hits, but because of Depeche Mode's inventive use of samplers, it would also be referenced alongside Kraftwerk, New Order, and Giorgio Moroder as an influence on the Chicago house
Frankie Knuckles. That's an awesome name, I gotta say.
and
Frankie
Detroit
Knuckles.
techno scenes. Despite this,
That was such a good era. Like, obviously, it's a little before my time, but I'm just saying, you can tell that the musicians in those disco places and those different things, they're like trying to play with sounds and see what works. It's like, you know, like all these weird sounds. And it's not just your traditional, let's get an instrument and play it. Yeah, I like it. It's all the influences. Everybody draws upon the influence. You can see that they were drawing upon a couple of German bands and stuff, they said, and then they were looking at people in the U.S. and seeing what's working over here, and like all these things. It's just, you got to be influenced, but then you got to put your own spin on it, which is, I'm assuming, you know, what they did by the end in order to make it so big. You know, You don't steal from some other people. You just be influenced by them, right?
Melody maker Steve Sutherland described the album as Pussycats desperate to appear perverted, as an escape from the superficiality of teen stardom. Because of this, by
that's a
1987, Depeche Mode were barely talking to the UK press, sick of their antagonism for the group. There was this band that everybody loved to hate, and yet they were incredibly successful. Why? Why do you think you're so successful?
Sounds like Nickelback. That reminds me of Nickelback, like as in there was a band that everybody just loved to hate them, but they were incredibly successful. They'd sell out concerts, they'd rock it, have #1 hits on the radio, and everybody knows the words to all their songs, but they're just like, they'd get a lot of hate. That's crazy.
Why do you think you're on this planet, basically? It got to the point in interviews where we'd just say, fuck you, and walk out. This contrasted with their cult status in the US.
Wow.
For the average American, Depeche Mode were just another English new wave one-hit wonder that dropped off top 40 radio. But for those that understood their dark electronic ambience, Dave Gahan's brooding vocals, and Gore's gothic romanticism, no one else were better. And the cult was ever growing.
Okay.
For the Music for the Masses tour, they were playing arenas. This peaked with its 101st and last show, which filled Hollywood's 72,000 capacity Rose Bowl, and was captured for posterity on their 101 documentary and live album.
That's gotta feel good, though.
But Depeche Mode...
Like when you're struggling to make a name for yourself, the people are interviewing you, you're just like, get out of here, and they're all just coming at you with negativity, and you just keep pushing and with perseverance trying to get through it. Then you get to a concert like this, and you can put your mic out and have a big crowd of people singing your song. It almost makes it worth it, right? It's just awesome.
But Depeche Mode needed album sales to match, and their next album would prove if they could meet the challenge. We had perfected a formula by then, and it came to fruition on Music for the Masses. But our sales had become stagnant. We'd sold exactly the same number of albums each time since 1982's A Broken Frame. We realized that if we were going to advance, if we were going to make another record at all, then we would have to change. We needed a new approach, otherwise we wouldn't be challenging anything.
Well, that's just it, right? You have to evolve your sound. All mainstream artists have done it. Like, you start off, your first album usually doesn't sound anything like your last album. Now, and here's the thing. Sometimes the first people will look back and be like, the first album was amazing, and then they just fell off. They slowly got worse and worse because they tried to change, right? Now, there's reasons to do that. In this case, they're doing it because they need to make more album sales and actually grow. But then there's other times people are just, the artist starts off with a particular style, and then they're like, once you make 1 or 2 albums that sound like that, you want to do something different. You're like, okay, this time let's take it more acoustic, or let's get more instruments in here, or let's get a freaking jazz band in the background, right? Like, you gotta that's just it. Just let artists be creative, and not every album that they put out are you going to like equally as maybe their first album. And some people get better. Like, I know with the Goo Goo Dolls, for example, I like their later work way better than their first work. Their first couple albums, not a big fan of, a very different style. And then as they evolved, they got more into an acoustic sound. I like them better. So yeah, evolution of music. That's how you got to do it.
For what would be their 7th studio album, Depeche Mode acquired English producer Mark Ellis, aka Flood, as well as being the go-to producer for Mute for most of the 80s. He had previously aided in pushing U2 from sky-gazing post-punk hopefuls.
Oh, okay, worked with U2. Okay.
To the biggest band in the world on 1987's The Joshua Tree.
Okay, yeah, that song is like...
Which was exactly the kind of push that Depeche Mode were looking for. Having decided to jet to Berlin and Paris for Black Celebration and Music for the Masses respectively, as to evade scrutiny from head of Mute, Daniel Miller, they again chose to make the album a European affair. During that time...
Was U2 the biggest UK band ever? Well, obviously not ever. I mean, there's a lot of other ginormous bands that came out of there. Yeah, okay, I'm going to shut up now before I
in
Make a
our
fool of
career,
myself.
we were quite experimental in our choices of recording locations. And we loved the idea of going off and making each album an adventure. We recorded the majority of Violator in Milan, which was really good fun. How we got anything done, I don't know, because we were out partying most nights. As
Still
well as
partying, even though
Milan,
you
they
gotta
recorded
put the
in
work in
London,
first.
New York, and Genève in Denmark. The sessions lasting 8 months in total. But the first song to materialize was Personal Jesus. It was a rockabilly shuffle with nods to Elvis, melded
Rockabilly
with
shuffle.
electronic flourishes. A collision that Garn would describe as future blues.
They make interesting style choices of clothing. Cowboy hat, big old
In
glasses.
many ways, the song was a vast departure from the assumed Depeche Mode sound. Gore would usually write the skeleton of songs on an acoustic guitar and then transfer those noodlings to the synthesizer. But for Personal Jesus, that latter step was removed. While they had used
really?
guitars before on a smattering of tracks, most recently on Mass's Behind the Wheel.
Okay. So they're trying to get
This
a bit
was
more
the first
instruments
time where the
into it, instead of
guitar
just
would
all
be the
techno.
dominant instrument.
That might be the catch, right? Instead of just making it too synthesizer, right? Is what they say. Like, so it's too electronic. Then they're like, keep some of the instruments in there. Still keep it that electronic buzz to it, but also just keep some of the guitar in there. Add a bit more like drums, real drums, not keyboard drums.
It also showed an interest in blues and pure Americana that had previously only been hinted at on their Route 66 cover. Personal Jesus showed that Depeche Mode could go beyond themselves and even assume the role of a rock band. And
Really?
America ate it up,
Did they?
eventually. Initially released in August 1989 and quickly becoming a hit on college radio, it took a while for mainstream stations to catch on, said Garn to Melody Maker in March 1990. I mean, Personal Jesus has just gone into the US top 30, 6 months after it was released. It sold 500,000 records before it started being played on the big radio
what I mean, it's
stations.
all about the
It just
records.
built up in the clubs for 5 months, and the radio ignored it. Most of them still aren't playing it. Too weird, mate. Too fucking weird. They just don't get it. The 12-inch version of Personal Jesus would go gold.
It's true that they just don't get it. In many regards, they're sleeping on it, But at the same time, it's different. Music is different. There was a different sound, I bet, what was going on in America at this point in time than what was going on over in other parts of the world. So, and you don't know what you're up against over in the U.S. So, it's hard to say. But I get from the artist's point of view, they're like, we have this unique, original style and sound, and the U.S. needs to hear it. But that's why it's like they're sleeping on it.
And was the highest selling 12-inch that Warner Sire ever distributed, outselling anything by Madonna or Prince. By the time Personal Jesus had gone number 28 on Billboard, they already had released single number 2. The way Depeche Mode had previously worked was
Rocko
Martin Gore would write the songs, and by the time they got to the band, they were almost complete. Being that they wanted to try something new for this album, Gore would produce sketch demos, enough to get across an idea, at which point the rest of the band would add their input. The result was songs that were uncluttered and stripped down, in comparison to their previous work.
Right, they had a lot
Less
of cluttering.
industrial and more danceable. The sketch demo method made it so the process for making Enjoy the Silence in particular was way more a full band collaboration.
See, I think that was a big thing. Like they just said, they took out that industrialization sound, the whole the saws in the background and the jackhammers and everything else, and dial back the electric sound of it. I mean, when I say electric, I mean like the keyboards and all those digital effects and everything, and bring in some more instruments like they did. They showed them on the stage playing the guitar, right? They just had to fine tune it for the audience that was over here, I guess, But it blows my mind though. They said. When they came over, they outsold Madonna and Prince. Like, what?
The bare-bones version of Enjoy the Silence was a lone vocal from Gore, accompanied by a simple organ line.
Words like violence break the silence.
Just over 2 minutes long and akin to a funeral dirge. Flood and Alan Wilder heard this skeleton of an idea and felt it had legs. Wilder thought in particular the line,
All I ever wanted, all I ever needed is here in my arms.
Ooh, it's
reminded
good
him
line,
of Pet Shop Boys. Wanting to rearrange the track without interruption, Wilder and Flood suggested the rest of the band take off for the weekend. Once they returned, the band found that the song had been transformed by upping the tempo and adding a dance beat.
Okay.
While most of Depeche Mode were instantly smitten by the reworking of the song, its songwriter felt that it was missing its original intention. I was very
Okay.
wary of this at first. I thought the very nature of the song was, enjoy the silence. So
I
it
get
ought to
it,
have
I
a
get
very
it.
serene atmosphere. It took me a while to get used to the idea, but as we took it further that way with the guitar riff, it really pulled together.
Yeah, well, I get where he's coming from, though. He's like, the song is about Enjoy the Silence. You can't have a song called Enjoy the Silence, but you got tons of sound effects and music going on in your ear hole, right? So, but hey, it's what people wanted, right? And it worked.
As well as Gore's addition of a simplistic New Order styled guitar line. They also augmented the track with those iconic choir chords, utilizing an early sampler called the EMU Systems Emulator 2.
Okay.
While they were known for recording their own found samples, the choir came straight from a floppy disk.
They've been
As was
building it
often the
more and
case
more.
with Depeche Mode, Garn's brooding dulcet tones gave added meaning and texture to Gore's uncomplicated lyrics. Garn's marriage had recently dissolved and he was in a place of emotional loss, turning to drugs to fill the gap, lending his vocal a deeper resonance.
It's rough.
Though many have theorized that the song is about fractured relationships, or even heroin.
I see.
What the song is
a
actually-
lyric like that, you can take it two ways. It's like you give somebody a hug and you're like, all I ever needed is here in my arms, this person in my arms. But then at the same time, it's like all I ever needed now that I broke up with my wife is know what's here in my arm, right? That's pretty good.
About is up to the listener to decide. Look, we don't have any easy answers for anybody.
Right.
I write from my own personal experiences. How someone else wants to interpret them is fine with me.
And that's what I like about music. Since I started this channel, I'll put on a piece of music and I'm like, I give my thoughts and feedbacks and what I caught from it and how it impacted me. In some videos, people will come back and be like, you got it all wrong. That's not the meaning of the song. It's this or that. But I'm like, it's a work of art. Like if I walk away from the song feeling, reminiscent about, I don't know, a lost loved one. Whereas somebody's like, no, it's supposed to be about the loss of, I don't know, time or your grip on your life or something like that. And I'm like, well, what does it matter? Does it really matter? I guess. I don't know. I just interpret it in my own way.
My meaning's open-ended because any reaction to a song is a valid one. The album version of the track concludes with a hidden instrumental known as Interlude Number 2, Crucified.
Sounds good.
But after recording a rough version, Enjoy the Silence was basically done. We literally recorded it in a couple of days. Then we started messing with the song, trying to make it more than it was, and it never needed more. We put it out like that, and I think we knew between us that there was something very special about it, but we had no idea what a huge hit it was going to be.
Violator cracked open the top 10. Okay.
Enjoy the Silence would be released 2 months into the 90s. In a way, the song is a perfect bridging point, still using the synths and samplers that were a staple of the 1980s, but adding the kind of guitars and dance beats that would hit mainstream reappreciation in the 90s. In the US, Enjoy the Silence appealed not just to the Depeche cult and college radio, but mainstream stations latched onto it as well. The song would define what was possible from modern rock radio.
See, a lot of people ask me, like, how did you not hear of them and all this kind of stuff? But, like, I didn't get into music until the late 90s. I remember I was a teenager, and suddenly I'm like, you know what? Let's start, like, getting away from all my nerdy hobbies and my sports and different things that I was doing and being outdoors and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, I just never turned on a radio, never put on much music. Much music is like the equivalent of MTV here in Canada. Back in the day it was anyways. Yeah, and so I just didn't listen to it. And then suddenly I just started putting on much music, and I was like, okay. And then it's where, like, my first CD I ever bought was Our Lady Peace. And for you who don't know, one of the greatest Canadian rock bands of all time. You should check them out if you didn't. All right, let's go.
Nebulous classification. The term just referred to rock music that had a basis in punk, modern as opposed to classic rock. By the late 80s, it was basically alternative by a different name, and what college radio would morph into. In September 1988, it had gotten its own Billboard chart, and initially it was a scattered grab bag.
I've heard this before. I've never heard that before. Or that. Nope, never heard any of that except that one. Nope. Never heard any of these songs.
There was little in the way
Except
of
for that one.
cohesive sound, but Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence were some of the first modern rock hits that crossed over onto the pop charts.
Okay.
And alongside The Cure, Banshees and Peter Murphy, the format would briefly be known for its dark British alt-rock, while many more stations would switch to the modern rock format a year later.
Yeah, okay. Once grunge was created by Nirvana, that was it. That took over everything. That reshaped music and everything. Oh, man, my God, Nirvana had a huge impact. You know what's crazy? Like, my niece, like, I see her, like, wearing a Nirvana shirt. I'm like, people still love Nirvana, and I can't blame them, but it's like, to see the youth of today wearing Nirvana t-shirts is, like, mind-blowing.
Alt-rock, while many more stations would switch to the modern rock format a year later in the aftermath of grunge. Depeche Mode were an essential step to acceptance. The album was released in March 1990. We called it Violator as a joke. We wanted to come up with the most extreme, ridiculously heavy metal title we could. I'll be surprised if people will get the joke. But what the band didn't realize was how far this album would launch them into the public consciousness. The day after Violator was released, Depeche Mode was set to take part in an in-store signing at Warehouse Records in Los Angeles. Approximately 5,000 of the Depeche cult had been camped outside for up to 4 days before the event. We thought it was going to be about 30 people, and it turns out it's about 17 to 20,000. It's unbelievable. Despite the efforts of the stores...
expectations being like, I hope we can get, at least 24 people here or something. It's like 20,000.
Hired security. As the doors opened, there was a huge surge as everyone tried to get in. The signing lasted about 8 minutes before it was deemed too dangerous and the band were ushered to their hotel. By this point, there were over 200 police units, with the aid of helicopters, failing to control the situation, and the whole surrounding area was cordoned off. Though no one was seriously injured, the national news reported on it, claiming a riot had...
That, though, if the news calls it a riot, then that makes headlines, then that puts the band in the spotlight, right? That makes them even more badass. It puts all eyes on them. Like, it's not really bad publicity. I bet you they're going to spin this and say this didn't have a negative effect on the band. If anything, it made them more popular, right?
Had ensued, clamoring for this hot new band, with many implying parallels with the first blushes of Beatlemania. It showed that Depeche Mode were a big deal. The free exposure that this event had on the band made it so that Violator was the band's first album to go top 10 on Billboard, and it stayed on the chart for 74 weeks, going triple platinum in the process. Enjoy the Silence got to number 8 on the Hot 100 and sold 1 million copies. Still being on the charts 6 months later, the cult was now mainstream. Violator would also be the highest placing in the UK album chart, getting to number 2, while Enjoy the Silence went to number 6, as well as
2 and
winning
6
the
is still
Brit
good.
Award for Best Single in 1991. Their impact wasn't just on the charts. Many artists have taken influence from Violator-era Depeche Mode, whether that be the dark mutations of alternative rock that appeared from the 90s onwards. Placebo, AFI, My Chemical Romance, Deftones, Muse, late 90s.
Are they saying that the Smashing Pumpkins took their influence from, I was going to say Depeche Mode. How did he say it? So it's not Pesce, like Joe Pesci. Depeche. I don't know.
These Smashing Pumpkins
Forgot
and
already.
Linkin Park. The latter's Mike Shinoda even did an official new metal remix of Enjoy the Silence in 2004.
Really?
But what about those that retraced Depeche Mode's modern rock to pop hip footprints?
They had a big
the likes of
influence,
Coldplay, The Killers, and Churches. And that's not to mention the far-reaching reinterpretations of Enjoy the Silence.
All I ever wanted, all I ever needed.
People still singing it, eh? What a hit, man! All these different bands taking it, doing their own cover of it. Susan Boyle. Nice.
The thing I'm most proud of is the fact that we seem to have influenced people right across the board, in all different genres of music, metal bands, and Susan Boyle. Though it took them 10 years, they had become one of the biggest bands in the world, and the UK rock press finally had to reassess their preconceptions of Depeche Mode.
Oh, now they're all like, do you remember that article, that hit piece we wrote on them? Saying how trash they were, and they're crying out for attention and stuff. Sometimes then the critics got to eat their words, right? You know, well, they made them eat their words by sticking to their guns, sticking to their music, adapting, creating a new sound, creating a hit, you know, like they didn't give up.
They earned credibility on their own terms. Perhaps we should have described ourselves as a rock group. Maybe if we'd done that, people would have taken us a bit more seriously. But we aren't. We are a pop group, and proud of it. The only songs I can write are pop songs, no matter how dark and pervy some people might find them.
Pervy.
Enjoy the Silence proved that pop didn't have to be a dirty word. Why they went for the more heavy metal album title for it. With Violators' widespread mainstream acceptance, Depeche Mode finally silenced critics and actually made music for the masses.
Whew. Interesting. Okay, now I got a lot of backstory on the band coming into it. I have a lot more appreciation for them and their music and their sound and that kind of thing. So if we want more Depeche Mode on the future, did I say that right? Depeche Mode, right? Yes, I think I got it right that time. In the future, let me know in the comments down below. Go over here, check out one of these awesome videos while you're waiting, and I'll let you guys guide my channel as always. Peace and love, everybody. I'll see you in the next one, all right? Take care.